Incomplete works are very authenticity revealing, something beautiful about the raw version of a work. Here's why unfinished creative projects define you in a good way. Number one, it reflects the real creative journey. So the reality is that most of the projects you make are not going to be finished. They're not going to be completed. If you're able to treat these unfinished projects that you make as an authentic representation of you as an artist instead of something that has to be perfectly polished, you will become a better artist. If you are able to acknowledge that not every idea that you have is going to be good, even most of the ideas that you have are not going to be good, it's going to make you a better creative, and it's going to make you more productive, and overall it's just going to make you better at your craft. So half the battle of doing anything creative or pursuing an artistic career is acknowledging when you make something that's just not good. Half the time you kind of just have to accept and acknowledge and be okay with the fact that a lot of your ideas and your work is just gonna suck. You need to be able to develop the skill of acknowledging when your work is not good and when to give up on an idea and when to push forward and push through a project. If you can't do that, you won't be good at your work and you're not going to improve. And also, like, on a superficial level, you don't really want that, because you never want to be the person that can't plainly see like the quality of their own work. I think there's nothing embarrassing about being maybe not as good as you would like to be at your craft, but being honest and able to see transparently where you are and what level you're at. And that's not embarrassing if you're showing your work to other people, but it's really embarrassing when you yourself can't see the true quality of the work that you're producing, but you think very highly of yourself. And I'm not saying that you should put yourself down or feel down in the dumps, but I think there's a difference between acknowledging where you are now and where you want to go and being delusional about the quality of the things that you want to make are. I think that makes you lose your credibility as a creative person or as an artistic person, because you're not able to objectively assess your work in the context of other people and the wider world of creatives. And also, it makes it so that you can't really improve, because if you already think you're really good, you're not really going to be that motivated to improve yourself. Like, again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be proud of the work you do. I think a lot of the times we're too hard on ourselves, but also it goes both ways, right? You don't want to be like on the extreme of either end. And also, sometimes leaving something unfinished is important because it helps you preserve the original vision that you had for your work. That's going to be buried if you keep working on it. Sometimes when you work on a project too much and you tweak it too much, you end up losing kind of the ideas that you had originally. If you tweak something too much and you refine it too much, you kind of lose the original spark and inspiration that you had, and it gets lost in the process of just trying to complete the project, and it doesn't end up being as good as if you had just left it kind of unfinished. I know that this is like really difficult to do, because I always have this issue where I will just keep working on something until it's completely ruined, and then I'll look back and be like, I should have stopped like ages ago, but you can't do it because it's really hard to see objectively when you need to put something down. I think for all creatives, it's really hard to know when you can stop editing something, also because once you do it, you can't undo it unless you're doing it digitally, you know what I mean? And the issue is made especially difficult when you think about the fact that, like, if you think about it, technically creative works are like never really done, you know? Like, there's always a page that you can edit, or like a sentence that you want to tweak, or like a brush stroke that you can add, you know? And so it's like especially important, but like especially impossible to be able to like zoom out and see the big picture and like the big idea that you wanted to establish originally, because when you get so focused on details, it's really easy to like tweak lots of little bits and then realize when you zoom out that none of them actually work together. And when you obsess over every single detail, it's really, really easy to lose clarity and like the original intent of what you wanted to make. When you leave something unfinished, it could then just maintain the artistic integrity that you had in the work in the first place. If you force a project, most likely it's gonna compromise like your creative integrity when you could have left it unfinished and prevented yourself from like diluting the quality of your vision and your work. Leaving things unfinished also stops you from being a perfectionist about your work, and perfectionism is definitely ruining your work. Again, going back to what I said previously, because you're so focused on like making it absolutely perfect, there's no way it's gonna be perfect, because like every time you make something, as soon as you decide you're done with it, you're gonna find like a million other things that are like wrong with it, you know what I mean? So like perfection is impossible in an artistic craft. There's also the issue nowadays where it's like, it's really difficult to like focus on like actually enjoying making something and like the joy of like creating something instead of like focusing on the finished product. But I have this issue as well where it's like I don't really feel like I'm fulfilled if I'm just doing something and I'm like enjoying myself because I'm like, oh wait, I didn't finish that thing, even though like I know that that's not the right way to be thinking about things. And it's because like the pressure to produce good work that's like perfect is so high, it's really difficult to like unlearn it. So you really have to like actively push yourself to be okay with it. I think you really have to find the balance between perfectionism and productivity, but also more importantly, you have to know that like not all projects have to be complete or perfect to be meaningful. You can't expect yourself to be extremely productive as an artist, but to also produce work every time consistently that you're like very proud of. It's not possible to do both. And it's because if you want to be really productive and like produce a crap ton of work as an artist, it's gonna take a lot of time, like more time than you have. You can't expect yourself as a person or like a creative person to be extremely productive all the time in the way that you're like always consistently putting out work all the time really fast, but then also expect for each of these pieces to be like quality, high quality work, because it doesn't work that way. Because if you want to produce a lot of work all the time, the pace and like the speed at which you produce work is not really conducive to like making work that's very polished, because polishing things takes time, you know what I mean? You need to decide what the trade-off is for you personally as to whether or not you want to be able to consistently put out work and like be able to kind of evolve what it is that you're doing versus being someone that only produces quality work. Both approaches are like good. You might be like, I really want to have a really precise, quality, small, controlled portfolio of the things that I put out, right? So that people have value behind, I have value behind my name and as a brand. Or you might be like, I'd prefer to just kind of just try things out and be more consistent in the work that I put out. And both of these are really good ideas, but you just need to know that like you can't do both at the same time. It's not possible. I think it's best that you kind of try both methods and then try and find like the perfect sliding scale balance for yourself. So personally growing up, I think I was really focused on quality, but I think it came from a place where like I was really insecure about any of the creative work that I did. So like anytime I made something or I showed someone something, I had to make sure that it was like absolutely perfect and was like something that I was really proud of. So it was all about quality. So I would draw something and then I would hate it and then I would erase it and then I would redo it and then I would tweak it and then I would touch it up before I was able to show someone something. I think that was good in some sense because I think it makes you be able to focus on detail and to kind of focus and power through a task even if it gets a little bit difficult. And it's good for like learning because you can really understand the intricacies of what you're trying to do. But on the flip side, it's not as fun because you're really trying to like put yourself in kind of a stressful situation where you're insecure and you're second guessing everything that you do. And I think you forget the fact that like when you make art or like do something creative, it's meant to be fun. Hot take, it's meant to be fun. And so nowadays I try something different. Now I'm more on the side of I'm gonna try and put out consistent work. And obviously I'm gonna try my best to make it quality. I'm not purposely putting out crappy work, you know what I mean? But like, I think I've decided that in order to be able to be consistent in the work that I produce, there's gonna be some trade-off on quality. Like it's just gonna happen. Like it's not possible to do all these things at once, right? So my approach recently is when I have an idea, I'll just chase it all the way immediately. I'll kind of keep my focus on the vision and then chase the path down that and to kind of just focus on the end point instead of worrying about all the little missteps that I might make on the way there. So my approach recently is to kind of do things when I'm inspired and then just do them to completion. Again, this might not work for you. Maybe like starting a bunch of little projects at the same time and then kind of slowly easing yourself into that. That works too. Recently, I've been just doing one project at a time, but chasing them all the way and then just releasing them in the world. I've been trying to find the most straightforward way to just do things. A very simple example is this YouTube channel, right? So for a long time, I really wanted to do YouTube because every kid wants to do YouTube nowadays, right? But I always thought it was such hard work because it was like, oh my god, now I have to get a camera and then I have to learn how to edit and then I have to, you know, you have to do all of these things and it's really annoying. And then it just is like so off-putting because you're like, well, there's so many things I need to do. I don't want to do them, and then you just don't do it at all. So now I've decided, so I film on my iPhone and I just make really simple edits, and you can tell, I think sometimes it's not very good, but like I feel like but I'm also just starting out, you know? Sometimes I'm not very good at editing, and it's also because I don't like editing. It's just not fun for me. So I know that I just have to be like less precious about each video that I make. I think it's more important now for me to just kind of get the idea out as opposed to like kind of fine-tuning each single video and then releasing it after several months. Like I thought anytime I started a project, I needed to make it like absolutely perfect, and like every section of it needed to be complete and nice before it was released or shown to anyone, which is one approach to do, but right now I'm kind of just in the portion of my life where I'm like, I just need to kind of release things and then let go of it, and then sometimes you're not going to be able to control every aspect and you just have to kind of be fine with it. So one example you can see is my previous video that I made where the editing is like kind of there, but like a lot of the times there are a lot of like little silly mistakes, like the subtitles are not very good. Sometimes I do typos and stuff, and again, I'm not trying to encourage purposely bad work for the sake of like releasing stuff, like that's also not good, but I'm saying I think like 70% of the video was there, like quality wise, you know, like the ideas are there. I think people can kind of understand what I'm trying to get at, and that little like 5% or like 10% or like the little dumb pauses or like dumb edits that are like not very good, yeah, I could go back and like edit them, but also I would prefer to just kind of release it while I'm still feeling excited about this project, because once you kind of go in and you fine tweak everything, I feel like a lot of the times you lose a lot of the passion that you had originally because it kind of becomes a chore for you, you know? And it's like, I'm trying to produce work to inspire other people, right? But like also I need to kind of like enjoy the work I'm making myself. It really helps me to figure out that the packaging of whatever creative work you're making, it doesn't have to be perfect. People just kind of need to understand what it is that you're getting at. The most important thing for when you do anything creative is for other people to be able to respond to your work. And I really doubt that if you're feeling insecure about the work you make because it's not completely perfect, because you made a couple errors that could be tweaked, I really doubt that people are gonna stop feeling the feeling that they get from the stuff that you put out because you made a stupid spelling error in your paragraph. Specifically, in that previous video I made, after I released it, on like the third day that I released it, I watched it back and then realized in one of the subtitles, instead of saying drawing, I wrote. So you can go back and see if you can find it. So my point is that people are not going to react to your work poorly or in a different way just because it's got a couple like rough edges around it. Like not if the quality is like completely shot to shit, like I'm not saying that, but if to the 90% of it is still there, you know? And if it's just got like a couple issues that needs to be ironed out, who cares? Who cares? Because it's not going to impact ultimately how creative works make you feel, right? And like ultimately anything creative is about the feeling that you evoke in the other person that's kind of consuming and viewing your craft. It's not going to be taken away from like an objective little mistake. And also there's something beautiful about the raw version of a work. I think there's something special about when a work is kind of, you can kind of see how it got to that stage. I think there's something really special about that. There are lots of works of art that are like technically incomplete and like really rough and like not refined at all, but they're still considered masterpieces. Like Da Vinci had lots of incomplete pieces, lots of fine artists, they don't finish their pieces, but when you look at them, it still evokes the same feeling that you have within you. And I'd argue that sometimes it makes the feeling even stronger because you can kind of see where it started from, and there's like a vulnerable thing about seeing something that's not fully the way that the artist intended it to be presented to you, you know? It's like something very intimate and vulnerable about that, and I think that makes it even more valuable. You can see this in like writers as well. For example, like Kafka, one of his most famous works, like The Castle, right? I know technically he didn't want this released, but like it's one of his most famous books and he never completed it. It's an incomplete novel, but it's still considered, you know, a great literary masterpiece. So it might not be as satisfying to you as the artist because you have like a vision in your head of how you wanted it, but to audiences and to viewers, I don't think it's like that at all. And I think it actually makes it more interesting because you can see all the layers and the process it took for the artist to get there. Personally, to be honest, I always feel like I prefer the rough initial drawings over a polished piece, and it's because you can see all of like the rough strokes and like the rough lines, but I think also it's like I think it's a style preference. I like when things kind of just go there and they kind of just do it and then they don't really refine it that much. I think that's a personal preference as well. I like the feeling I get when I know that the other person, when they made it, they were trying to like get the idea down as fast as possible, and they're like really trying to like capture exactly what it is that they wanted, and they're almost like chasing the feeling, you know? Because I feel like if you're creative, you definitely know this, where it's like sometimes when you're writing something and you realize like your hand can't really move fast enough in order for your ideas to get to the page, and if you stop writing at any point, the entire premise and the entire idea is going to evaporate, right? So you kind of just you can't stop, really. You just have to kind of follow through, because as soon as you like pause for a minute, the thing is gone, like the spark is gone. While polished pieces are also beautiful, right? They show you fully what someone wanted as a vision, and there's something also special about being able to kind of present yourself in the way that you want to be presented and seen. I think that having polished, unpolished, completed, and incomplete works in your portfolio, it just makes you more interesting because you can see all of these different facets and all these different sides to an artist. Incomplete works are very authenticity revealing, so maybe it's not the perfect reflection of how you want to be seen as an artist, but I think it's a better reflection of you as a person and you yourself. So rather than focusing solely on your polished pieces when you're demonstrating your work to people, unfinished projects really show the raw side of you and your raw creativity and your ideas. Another point is like lots of famous works, like really famous works, are actually incomplete, like way more than you think there are. So here's a couple examples of like masterpieces, like objectively masterpieces that are like incomplete. Barcelona, the building, the Sagrada Familia, I definitely said that wrong. This very famous basilica in Spain, it's incomplete. It's not done to the artist's vision, you know, but it's still beautiful. When you go in, you're still going to be in awe by the entirety of the fact that it exists. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't take away from you as a visitor to the basilica when you see it and you know the fact, you know the lore, and it's like, oh, this is technically incomplete, but it's like you as a viewer don't realize that, and even if you do, it doesn't really affect your experience there. Mozart's Requiem, that was incomplete. Beatles, they were working on the album Get Back, that was never complete. Get Back was never completed, and most of the songs from that album were just kind of repurposed and used in the Let It Be album. Orson Welles' film The Other Side of the Wind was never completed. Lots of sculptures are incompleted. Look at all of these. Lots of sculptures get destroyed, you know what I mean? Like, over the passage of time, your work, even if it is complete, it's gonna get destroyed, and like it doesn't make the value that you have as an audience member diminished, you know? I think it gives it more character, and lots of, if you go into any museum, a lot of the things on display, they're incomplete, but they're still in the museum. My point is that the fact that something is unfinished, it doesn't make it worthless, and it doesn't make it not valuable. Whether or not the work that you make is complete, ultimately, it doesn't matter as much as you think it does, especially for artistic projects where like technically everything is subjective anyway. Something interesting is how artists might use kind of an unresolved aesthetic or leave something unfinished as a deliberate choice. So lots of sculptors use the effect of kind of having an incomplete sculpture to add a certain effect to their pieces. If you look at these depictions of the sea by Turner, they're all incomplete, or like he purposely left them kind of incomplete looking. It even has like a name for this type of aesthetic, and it's called non-finito. And non-finito means intentionally leaving something unfinished as an expression, and it allows you as the viewer to look at a piece which is unfinished and infer and interpret how you think the meaning of the piece is. So following on from that, the point is that sometimes leaving a piece unfinished can actually give the piece greater meaning. So Alice Neal is an artist that is notable for her work where she purposely left them unfinished. So during her process, a lot of the times she would invite strangers into her house to sit for a portrait. One day she met James Hunter and asked him to come to her house and sit for a portrait. This was during 1965, and it was when the American authorities decided that they were going to send more troops to Vietnam. So James Hunter had just found out that he was going to be drafted into the Vietnam War when he came to Alice Neal's house to sit for this painting for her, and that he would have to leave in 1 week. So during the first sitting, Alice Neal managed to paint parts of James's portrait. So she managed to paint most of his face and hands, and she roughly sketched out the rest of the outline. But then James had to leave for the Vietnam War, and he never returned from combat. He died during the war, and Alice Neal never got to finish that work of James Hunter. And so the fact that the work is incomplete gives the work more meaning, because the work is unfinished because the subject had to leave for Vietnam War and he never returned from combat. And so the piece manages to capture the sadness that Hunter felt during that initial sitting. Alice Neal decided to sign it anyway and just display it, and it was displayed at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Learning that story just makes it so much more powerful because you know why the work was unfinished, and it gives the painting more meaning. And I feel like when you look at the piece, you can see in his eyes complete turmoil that this man surely was going through. And the fact that it's incomplete, it just evokes a certain feeling in you as a viewer, even if you don't know the original story of the piece. Because I feel like a lot of the times when something's incomplete, it means that there are things left unsaid. There are things left unsaid in this man's life because he never got to say them. It's a more faithful portrayal of the story behind this piece in order to just kind of leave it unfinished. Another point is that leaving projects unfinished can allow you to express yourself more freely without feeling the pressure to have to finalize a piece. And that can actually lead to more interesting and unconventional approaches in your art. I feel like if you have a collection of like unfinished pieces, because they're not finished, you haven't invested that much time into them, and so you're more willing to experiment with different mediums and different techniques and styles and ideas. And ultimately, it can make you as an artist better because you can demonstrate that you're willing to do all of these things and take all of these risks. And then when you're showing someone a portfolio of the work you've done, you can show that you're willing to try new things. And that really demonstrates your breadth and your versatility. And I think that just increases your value as a creative or as an artist. And it also just encourages learning and growth. So unfinished work and unfinished projects are really valuable learning tools because they provide more opportunities for you to reflect on what you did and what you didn't do. And it helps you reflect on what works and what doesn't work. And you can grow and improve without feeling the pressure to have to finalize and complete a finished piece. I feel like every time you take a break as an artist, you just grow more from it. It's really important to be able to take breaks because it really allows you to reflect on a piece, and that can actually lead to better improvements if you do choose to complete it and to refine it later on. And it's because you're able to look at it with like a fresh eye. Have you ever tried like working through the night, like pulling an all-nighter, finishing something? It never looks that good at the end because you were looking at it for so long that it doesn't even look like a thing anymore. Have you ever like written your own name over and over and over again? Like after a while, it kind of just doesn't look like anything anymore. It just kind of looks like a series of like squiggly lines. And it's because when you focus so much on something, you kind of just lose it kind of just loses all meaning. So taking that initial break and leaving a project unfinished, if you do choose to come back to it later, it could just make it better. It makes it easier for you to see it clearly and objectively for what it is. And even if you don't ever finish these projects, that's fine too, because they're still valuable. I think a lot of the times we forget that like work and like your creative portfolio is not a static thing. Like even if you don't finish something, it's still useful. Unfinished projects serve as a very useful resource bank for you in the future. All of your projects, you can draw elements from them. You know, you can draw inspiration from your unfinished work, even if they're unfinished. A really good concept or like a really good idea you had in a certain past project that you didn't finish, you can use that again. You know, like it's not a finite resource. You can recycle ideas, you can use them in new creations. None of the time you spent on old projects that never finish are wasted. None of that time is wasted. So there shouldn't be that pressure you put on yourself to finish things anyway. And on the topic of like stopping doing things and taking breaks, it just stops burnout. You don't want to be burnt out. Continually pushing yourself to finish things just leads to burnout and it just makes you miserable. And then also, when you're burnt out, you can't do anything. It's gonna be like really all or nothing where you push yourself all the way and it doesn't turn out good, and then you burn out and you do nothing, which is actually, if you think about it, way less productive than doing a little bit and deciding when to stop and then doing a little bit and deciding when to stop. You know what I mean? If you allow yourself to leave projects alone, it can help you maintain your enthusiasm and your love for your craft. And you are better able to allocate your resources and your energy towards ideas that are more inspiring and interesting to you. Also, sometimes your interests just change, and that's fine. Sometimes you don't want to work on a project anymore. You don't want to finish it anymore because it's not something that you resonate with anymore. It's not an idea that you like anymore. That's fine. You can stop. As a creative person or as an artist, it's really important to be able to acknowledge when you no longer like the work that you're doing because you don't like the idea anymore. And you need to be able to adapt to you as a changing person, and you need to be able to adapt to your changing interests. I actually feel like if you're a good artist, or like if you're really in tune with your craft, it's a good thing if your inspiration evolves, because then it means that you're learning and you're growing. Like, your interest and inspiration should evolve, and you should lose interest in some of your old work. You should be able to adapt and shift your focus towards things that interest you, and be able to put things down when they no longer align with what you want to do anyway. I feel like you shouldn't be indebted to a past version of you who saw a certain artistic vision for something that you no longer see in your current self. Like, I don't feel like you need to push through on something if you don't really want it anymore. But obviously, you need to be able to separate out whether or not the feeling that you're experiencing is you no longer resonating and aligning with the thing that you wanted and no longer liking that inspiration, versus you don't want to do this thing anymore because it's getting a little bit hard and you don't want to push through, but you still like the idea of it. Those are two different things. But also, I feel like this point applies to you like a little bit differently depending on your actual craft. So for example, if you're like a musician, right, and you're in the kind of album release cycle, because of the way that music album cycles work, right, you're always releasing work that's like produced like a year or two before it's actually released, you know what I mean? So it's like no longer a reflection of you as a musician now. So Billie Eilish did an interview where she talks about this album release cycle and how it kind of highlights the disconnect between an artist's current state of being and the music that they release. So she said that by the time an album is released, it often reflects how she felt a year ago when she actually wrote the music, and it's not a reflection of her current emotions and experiences. And she acknowledged that this delay can make it really challenging as an artist because it makes it feel like your released work never truly represents you at any given moment. So like, you need to know whether or not that is just a limitation of your craft, in which case you need to just kind of be aware of that. So for example, like if you're a musician and you stop doing projects because they no longer resonate with you, well, because of how your industry works, you'll just never produce work, right? So like at some points you do kind of just need to like acknowledge it and like be okay with that. I think you can like try and get around this by working on lots of projects at once, because then it's more likely to be a better reflection of you as a creative person and your kind of creative ideas, which might help it be more in sync with your evolving creative vision. Even if you're not a musician, I feel like this advice works as well. If you work on multiple projects at once, it can kind of help you keep things fresh, and working on all of these projects at once can help you resonate more deeply with your work and how your work reflects your life. Thank you for watching this video. You know what I'm gonna say, all of the blah blah blah. Follow me on Instagram, Substack. You want to send me a donation on Coffee, the tip jar, that'd be cool. I also sell original work on Coffee. All of the links are, you know how this goes, you watch YouTube, you know how it works.